In structuralism, language appears as a kind of stable system where one signified is attached to a signifier. Although there is no relationship between a signifier and signified, that relationship is purely arbitrary. But if there is this tendency of one signifier to be attached to a signified, then it means that language becomes a kind of stable system. So in narratology, you had the concept of order, you had the concept of neat organization of categories. And in language, you had this concept of language appearing as a kind of closed system, as a kind of stable system. Linguistics, as such, borrows some organizational categories. It uses some organizational categories which are neat and which are objective, which appear very smooth. And because structuralism borrowed from linguistics, and so it believed in many of those neat categories. That means language as a kind of closed and stable system. Language as a kind of closed and stable system. That was one important point. But post-structuralism, as we saw, looks at things differently. It is a kind of fuller working out of the implications of structuralism, or in other words, it tries to see up to a certain point where structuralism was not able to reach. That means it can see full implications of structuralist theory. And in that way, it differs from structuralism. And when it looks at language from that angle, language becomes much less a stable affair. That means language becomes a slippery medium. It becomes a very unstable kind of affair. We'll come to this point a bit later. And you know that in post-structuralism, there are different strands. Deconstruction is one major strand in post-structuralism. There are others, and they come from the ideas, theories of Michel Foucault. There is yet another very important strand, which is called psychoanalysis, which is influenced by the ideas of Jacques Lacan, who interpreted Sigmund Freud. In other words, post-structuralism depends a great deal on different kinds of readings. Lacan reading Freud, Derrida reading Rousseau, and some other philosophers. So when we look at post-structuralism, we'll further say that post-structuralism also borrows its ideas from philosophy, unlike structuralism, which borrows its ideas from linguistics. And because it borrows its ideas from philosophy, and philosophy never appeared a very coherent, very organized kind of system, and so you can see post-structuralism as presenting very diffuse categories, right? And deconstruction obviously is one very important strand in post-structuralism. So we begin talking about deconstruction first, and now today and tomorrow we'll talk about deconstruction. If we have to put our ideas in very simple terms, we can say that there is one very important linguistic dimension of deconstruction, linguistic dimension, where deconstruction talks about language, where it talks about language and it differs from the ideas of many structuralist thinkers about language. And in particular, deconstruction takes issue with Ferdinand de Saussure's ideas of language, where language appeared a kind of stable system. So this is the linguistic dimension of deconstruction. There is also the philosophical dimension of deconstruction, right? Philosophical dimension. And what is that philosophical dimension of deconstruction? It refers to our tendency to look at our world in a certain manner. That means here we look at some concepts, some important ideas which work as a kind of centering principle for all our experience and for our world. So this is the philosophical dimension of deconstruction. First was the linguistic dimension. Second is the philosophical dimension. And the third important dimension of deconstruction is, you can say, it is the political dimension of deconstruction. Political dimension of deconstruction also depends, say, this philosophical dimension of deconstruction and also on linguistic dimension of deconstruction. But political dimension of deconstruction looks at the role of ideologies in our world, role of social ideologies in our world. And those ideologies are always around us. We have a certain view of the world, but that view is based on certain ideologies. We have a certain view of reality, but that view is based on certain ideologies. We have a certain view of ourselves that again is based on certain ideologies. Why is this point important in deconstruction, this concept of ideologies? Because when deconstruction was used as an important method of study, especially in Anglo-American world, especially in literary criticism, which is produced by or which has been produced by Anglo-American universities, then somehow they focus a great deal on linguistic dimension of deconstruction rather than the political dimension of deconstruction. Whereas one important reason why deconstruction appeared on the scene was political. Because we look at deconstruction, we look at some other post-structuralist ideas in the context of students' protest movement in France, right, in 1968, when the entire French state appeared very uncertain of its future because students protested on the streets against the authoritarian state and students joined forces with the working class. And for a while, the president of the French Republic. Yes, Mira, you have something to say? Yes, please.
I mean, I didn't get it. Please, I'm sorry to interrupt like this.
Which point? Which point?
This where you started about why this concept of ideologies is very important.
Okay, fine. Actually, the concept of ideology is extremely important in post-structuralist theory. We'll come back to this concept of ideology and we'll see this concept of ideology in different forms again and again. So at the moment, let me just say there is the work of Michel Foucault, who talks about the nature of subject and how subject is formed, how an individual is formed. And here it is the role of ideology is very important in post-structuralist theory because number of thinkers have talked about ideology. They have often used different terms, but somehow you can also see some kind of overlap between the ideas which those different terms try to signify. So Michel Foucault uses the term discourse. Discourse. That means there is that discourse in the world, or human beings are formed by many of those discourses around them. Subject is formed by many of those discourses around them. We'll come, we'll discuss this concept of discourse. But at the moment, discourse means all those ideas, all those practices which say form a subject. Similarly, there is another Marxist thinker, say revisionist Marxist thinker, Lou Althusser. He talked about the concept of ideological state apparatuses. That means there is the role of ideology in our life, and ideology is all around us, and ideology is responsible for shaping human behavior. That is the concept of Lou Althusser. Another Marxist thinker, Gramsci, he talks about the concept of hegemony, right? And again, he talks about those dominant ideas. So what we see is that we encounter different ideologies at different places, and we are surrounded by those ideologies. This aspect of deconstruction is important for us to understand, because later when we study feminist theory, or when we study post-colonialism, or when we study many of those oppositional reading practices, then we see that deconstruction becomes important to understand those practices. So if we think about this concept of ideology, and if we think about social ideologies which surround us, then deconstruction, in fact, looks at the role of those social ideologies which somehow appear in an invisible manner. So deconstruction, we mentioned three important aspects of deconstruction. There is the linguistic dimension of deconstruction, where deconstruction takes issues with Ferdinand de Saussure's view of language as a kind of stable system. And we also look at the philosophical dimension of deconstruction, where we think about the concept of centering, how our entire experience is centered around certain concepts. And we also look at the political dimension of deconstruction, where we can see the role of many of those social ideologies and how we can possibly be alert to the bad role that those social ideologies can play. That means these three dimensions are important in their own way, but we cannot probably separate all these three dimensions. They all are part of deconstruction, and they all are part of a particular theory which was given by Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida. So here we can say that deconstruction is a term which was used by Jacques Derrida. He was an Algerian philosopher, but say he was brought up in France, so obviously he wrote in French, and his works have been translated into English. His most important work was of grammatology, and actually it is not correct to say it was his most important work. There are a number of other works also, but of grammatology is an important work by Jacques Derrida, and many of his works which are relevant to our discussion, they appeared in 1967. 1967. Now, this work of grammatology was also translated into English by an Indian theorist whose name is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. You know Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. She translated Derrida's famous work of grammatology into English. So, if we are talking about deconstruction, we practically are talking about Jacques Derrida, but we also talk about some of the followers of Jacques Derrida. And here, what becomes important is the work produced in the American academy, in American universities. And here the name of Paul de Man is especially important. Paul de Man. There is another writer, Hillis Miller, and Geoffrey Hartman. So you can possibly think about these three, four important names: Paul de Man, Geoffrey Hartman, and J. Hillis Miller. An important thing is that most of these important names belong to the University of Yale. University of Yale. So that means that became the center. And Derrida also spent some time there. So after giving this kind of background and this kind of overview, we can start talking about Derrida's ideas. And we first begin with his view of language and how he differs from the position taken by Ferdinand de Saussure. One more thing we should add, and that has something to do with one important German philosopher, Nietzsche. His name is pronounced as Nietzsche, although in Urdu we often say Nietzsche. So you can understand the philosopher we are talking about. There are some important lines of Nietzsche, and one important line is that there is no concept of correctness in interpretation. That means we only have interpretations. We don't have facts. That means we don't have facts, we have only interpretations. There is another view that what a man finds in a text, he himself has imported that into the text, which is meaningless. That means a text is meaningless, and what a man finds in a text is what he himself has imported into it. There are no facts, only interpretations. There is no concept of correctness in, and what man finds in a text is what he himself has imported into it. A text is meaningless. That means you can see this kind of nihilism. But many of the opponents of deconstruction say that most writers belonging to the school of deconstruction, they write under influence of Nietzsche's ideas. And especially this view that there is no concept of correctness in an interpretation. So coming back to Jacques Derrida, and here you might recall that when Saussure talked about language, he talked about a sign which consists of a signifier and a signified. You have a signifier, cat, that is the sound image. Cat is the sound image. And what this word cat signifies, that cute animal you can say, or that naughty animal that you can say, or that treacherous animal that you say. You can have all these different concepts in your mind. So you have the word cat and you have that concept which you have in your mind. And the word cat is cat because of its difference from other words. So we talked about one particular phoneme which distributes meaning in language. That means if we have the word cat, we also have the word bat. And the word cat differs from the word bat because the word bat uses a different phoneme. And similarly, you can see that cat, bat, and there can be other words, rat, right? Rat. had, met. These are all possible variations. In all these cases, what have we seen? We have seen that one phoneme was replaced by another, and this brings out change in the word, change in the meaning, right? So that means cat becomes cat because it is not bat. Cat becomes cat because it is not rat, mat, hat, or many of those other words. But here another question comes up, and that question is that there are other phonemes also in this word. It is not simply the first phoneme, ka, ba. It is also the phoneme at the end. Say cat. So it can be can also, it can be car also, it can be cab also, right? And it can be cap also. That means you replace that ta sound by ba sound, it will become cab. You replace that ta sound by n or na sound and it will become can. So that means this process can continue. It means that if we try to draw a certain boundary, if we try to draw a certain line, where can we draw that line? Because if cat is cat because it is not car or it is not cab, but it is also cat because it is not cab, because it is not bat, and it is not many other words. Now this brings Derrida to an important observation that Saussure talked about language as a kind of stable system. Language as a kind of closed affair. But language becomes a much more open affair if we follow structuralist insights about language. Saussure thinks about a delimited view of language, a delimited universe. But this universe of language becomes limitless. Now let us stretch this point further. There in structuralism, we talked about a sign consisting of signifier and signified. Signifier and signified. Right. But if you look for the meaning of a signifier, what you see, you come across a word, maybe with the help of a dictionary, you try to see the meaning of a signifier and you see another word there. But that other word is also a signifier. And then you look at the meaning of that other word and dictionary will possibly take you to yet another word, but that another word is also signifier. That means language probably consists only of signifiers. It never reaches a point where we are talking about a particular concept. That means we are talking about language which is referring to itself. We are not reaching a particular point where we reach that concept per se. So cat, and you say that, okay, cat, that flurried, that animal. And when we look at the meaning of the animal, then we see another word, four-legged animal. And then we see the meaning of four-legged animal, then we see another word. So that means language is not a stable affair. Furthermore, we also see that a particular sign must be repeatable. A particular sign can be written also. But when something is written, that further divides its identity. I'll come back to this point. So we see that language is not a stable affair. Signifier leads us to another signifier. and there cannot be a neat distinction between a signifier and signified. We never come to a point where a signified is not a signifier, where a signified is not a signifier. That means we do not go out of this chain of signifiers, and language becomes a kind of limitless universe. There is one line of Jacques Derrida that there is nothing outside the text. There is nothing outside the text. That means our world consists of those texts. There is yet another important aspect of this relationship between a signifier and signified. When we read something, there we see that language becomes a kind of temporal process. That means it exists in time. If I say something like this, that I never said you were a bad writer. I never said you are a bad writer. Then I use the word I, and then I move to the word never, and then said, and so on. That means one word relays me to another word. And then at the end, when we reach, we have to take into account all those words which have gone before. This means here all those words become important. And here we are talking about syntagmatic dimension of language that Ferdinand de Saussure talked about. But there is the other dimension of language that Saussure talked about, that is the paradigmatic dimension of language, where if I say that I never said you are a bad writer, I never said that you are a leader, I never said that you are a bad carpenter, I never said that you are a bad cook, I never said, and so on. That means there we also think about all those other words which were excluded, which were not used, which were not chosen. And remember Roman Jakobson, when we talked about Roman Jakobson, we talked about the combinative function of language and the selective function of language. Principle of selection and principle of combination. But here, deconstruction takes this point to its farthest extreme. When it introduces the concept of trace, remember this is an important concept. Concept of trace, T-R-A-C-E, trace. By trace, we mean a word becomes what it is because it's not all those other words. But all those other words leave their trace in this word. All those other words leave their trace in this word, corrupting this word, contaminating this word. That means this word, say writer in this case, I never said you are a bad writer. This word writer carries the trace of all those other words which were not chosen, just as it carries the trace of all those other words which appear before this word in a sentence. That means this syntagmatic dimension of language, paradigmatic dimension of language both become important. When we think about trace, we are saying the word cat carries the trace of bat, rat, cab, and all those other words which were excluded to give the word cat its linguistic identity. But all those other words also somehow inhere in this word. And so they contemplate the meaning of this word. This is the concept of trace. And it also means that language is not a very stable system. It becomes a kind of slippery system because all those other words are there inhering in, contaminating this word, corrupting this word, or interfering with the meaning of this. Right. At this point, we can possibly say something on the basis of our own experience, because I'll take up this point tomorrow also. And what is that experience? We often write a message and we feel a sense of anxiety about meaning of many of those words which can probably slip out of those words. So we are writing something and very often there are cases of misunderstanding because what you have written, a different meaning is inferred in your words. In other words, say post-structuralist theory also talks about a kind of surplus of meaning in language, which is a theme of Rene Barthes and which is also a theme of Jacques Derrida. This surplus of meaning, this excess of meaning in words, because of the trace of all those other words uh, are antonyms, which are synonyms, which are words of similar sound, which are words of performing similar function. All those other words somehow inhere in the word that we are using. And this is the concept of peace. Think about one sentence. So tomorrow we'll discuss one sentence which I just thought about it. I never said you are a bad writer. Suppose if you say, I never said you are a bad writer. A simple sentence like this can possibly mean different things. And with the little effort, you can go online and you can find number of examples where you find a sentence, and if you focus on one word, you'll find that the meaning. So if you say that I never said you are a bad writer, you can interpret it. I never said you are a bad writer. Others say this. I never said you were a bad writer. I only implied you were a bad writer. I never said this in so many words. I never said you were a bad writer. That means you are a bad reader, but what bad writer. So a simple sentence like this can create misunderstandings, can create anxiety. And when deconstruction talks about the unstable nature of language, slippery medium that language is, it is focusing